Thank you for taking the time and opportunity to listen to this recording of our Winter Inclusion School Session 3, which is All of Us and LGBT+, Mind, Body and Spirit. My name is Shajida Ahmed and I am the Programme Director for Leadership and Organisational Development within the Staffordshire system. We join the recording as I describe how successful the Winter Inclusion School has been, which is a testament to how important the inclusion agenda is within the Staffordshire system. To date has been tremendous, and I think that is a testament to just how seriously we are taking inclusion here in Staffordshire and our absolute commitment in terms of wanting to make further improvements. These sessions are all about developing our understanding and having that conversation on inclusion, and very much around increasing the exposure on these topics. And this is very much with a view to us all collectively taking responsibility for actions to make improvements going forward and wanting to create environments that are intentionally inclusive by design. So in our first session back in November, we looked at race. In our second session, we looked at women in leadership. And today's session, as you know, is about LGBT+ inclusion. And we chose the title All of Us and LGBT+ because all of us have a role to play in breaking the cycle of silence that still surrounds LGBT in the workplace. All of us have a responsibility in creating a more LGBT+ inclusive environment for all our colleagues and service users. And all of us could probably brush up on our knowledge and understanding across the different sections of the LGBT+ acronym. And I very much include myself within this as someone who's not always confident in talking about LGBT+. So this brings me to the terminology that we're going to be using today. We will generally be using the acronym LGBT+, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender. And the plus particularly recognises the wider gender identities and sexualities, the inclusion of people who may not always fit neatly into the LGBT boxes. Other longer acronyms that we may use are LGBTQ, LGBTQIA, and they may be used on occasion today, and all of these are equally valid. Now, the reason that we are using this shortened acronym of LGBT+ is because it is the most commonly used term through the research and across society, and the one which you are probably most familiar with. So when we say LGBT+, we do aim to recognise and include the wider non-heterosexual and non-cisgender community. Now, having said all of that, these sessions are about the conversation and the learning for all of us. So please don't be put off from engaging in the discussion just because you're not sure of the right word or term. If you're not sure, please ask and we will help you. Now, the other thing that I really want to be clear about from the start is that LGBT+ exclusion is not a thing of the past. And just to remind you of some of the challenges in this area, the LGBT community face significant rates of discrimination, inequality, exclusion, and bullying and harassment in the workplace. And this unfortunately continues to happen despite all of the protective legislation, the organisational policies and inclusion strategies. And we know from the recent research undertaken by Accenture that only 31% of LGBT+ employees are fully open about their gender identity, expression or sexual orientation at work, and 57% believe it has slowed their progress at work. So although we use a single acronym, we absolutely recognise that the experiences of people in the different groups are often very different, with trans individuals experiencing some of the highest levels of discrimination and inclusion. So it is clear that progress isn't happening quickly enough and that intervention is still very much required. So today's session is a part of how we all collectively bring about that change by helping to cast light on the issues and by making people more comfortable with discussing them more often and in more detail. So that's my introduction, and I think enough from me. I am now going to welcome our host for today's conversation, who is Paul Bitherway. Paul is the Chief Operating Officer at University Hospital North Midlands, and we are all absolutely delighted that Paul is here with us today. So Paul, if I can please hand over to you to just say a few words by way of introduction to yourself on today's session before you introduce today's guest. So over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Shadina, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third in the series of the inclusion schools. My name is Paul Bitherway. I'm an openly gay man, married to my husband, Aaron, for 5 years, although we've been together for 20 years, and the proud father of Penny the pussy. So I am very pleased to be hosting this afternoon session to talk about the issues that have faced the LGBT plus community, to share stories from our three guests, all different stories, but all relate to their journey as individuals over the course of their lifetime. And what we're trying to demonstrate, what we're trying to get across to you is the variability of a journey of an LGBT plus person, the good and the bad, and really to demonstrate what it's like to be a member of the LGBT plus community. This is a safe space where you can ask the questions you want to ask, and there is no question that is upsetting if it comes from the heart and it comes from a genuine belief of wanting to know more, to be able to understand. This year's LGBT plus we're celebrating body, mind and spirit. And if I think about my personal journey over the last 26 years, my body, my mind and my spirit have been affected at times by being Paul the gay man. And interestingly, my story is a normal story. Other than for the last 5 or 6 years, I wouldn't have naturally promoted myself as a gay man in the workplace. I wouldn't hide it, but I wouldn't do sessions like this because I believed in myself as a human being and then a gay man. However, as Shadina said, talking about the discrimination, talking about the journey of LGBT plus people, it is really important to have role models. It's really important to make sure people understand that we are here and we are proud of who we are, to be accepted into whatever normal society is, but to be accepted as individuals, to be accepted as the people we are. And this inclusion school is very much about part of that journey, people listening to us, people listening to talk about the experience and reflecting on their friends, themselves, or the journey that they've been on over the past 20 or so years. I'm really pleased that sharing the stage, or the virtual stage, with me today, we have 3 individuals. We have Jenny Harvey from Unison and Combined. We have Vicky Pendleton, who's joining us from the police force, and we have Dr. Michael Brady, who, the clue's in the title, he's a doctor. He works at King's College in London, and he's also part of the NHS E team. All of our sessions over the next 40 minutes are going to be talking about our journeys, where we started and where we are now, and really reflect back some of the personal journeys that we have all been on over the course of our lifetimes. Michael will be starting, just to give him his 30-second warning. So Michael will be starting with us first of all, before we then have a conversation with Jenny about what we've just heard, and then to Vicky, and then there'll be a conversation with all 4 of us. Please use your hand button. Please use the chat. We will get round to all of your questions as we go through the next 45 minutes. But without further ado, please welcome Dr. Michael Brady.
Thank you, Paul. Afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and be part of this afternoon's session, which looks like a really great program. It's a real pleasure and an honour. As Paul said, I'm professional roles. I'm an HIV and sexual health consultant at King's College Hospital in South London. I am also the National Advisor for LGBT Health at NHS England. I also work for the Terence Higgins Trust, which is a large HIV and sexual health charity, and my pronouns are he, him. When I was reflecting on what to talk about, I kind of structured some of my thoughts and my personal reflections and experience around 4 key areas, some of which have been touched on already in the introductions. And that's what I'm going to kind of structure my thoughts around and give some of my personal examples of. So one of them is the real importance of creating an environment that is perceptively and visibly and palpably inclusive, and the importance of leadership in achieving that. The second one is about the importance within that context of creating an environment where this work is everybody's responsibility and not just that of the LGBT plus community. So creating an environment where everybody recognises the importance, has the skills and competence to make things better, and is able to do just simple things like challenging or calling out poor behaviour. Another area that I wanted to touch on is the importance of data collection and monitoring. If anyone's heard me speak before, they'll know I always throw that in, but I do have some personal reflections on that and some thoughts about the importance of that. And then the fourth reflection is about the importance of doing this work in partnership and engaging meaningfully with the communities that we're serving, whether that's our workforce and our staff, or whether that's the patients and service users that we care for. The other thing that I wanted, well, I guess the thing that I wanted to start off thinking about was context. So a step back before I come into the personal and the now, but a bit of the broader context, which has really nicely been introduced in Shajida's initial words. But I think it's really important to, when we're thinking about this, to step back and recognise the environment within which these challenges of personal experience exist. We know that pretty much across the board, without exception, LGBT plus patients fare much worse than their cisgendered and heterosexual peers, whether that's about how they access services, whether that's their experience of services, or whether that's their outcomes from services. And as we've also heard from Sajida, LGBT plus colleagues, staff, report much worse experiences in the staff survey, much higher rates of bullying, harassment, discrimination, whether that's from colleagues, from patients, from management, report poorer career progression and an environment that they don't feel comfortable to be or to bring their true selves to work. And the other context, which I think is an important one for us all, but also as part of my personal reflections on this, is the issue of intersectionality, which I think, whilst it is so important to have a focused discussion about LGBT or about race or about disability, that we always include intrinsically in that thinking about the intersectionalities between all of those sort of characteristics and experiences. I think in the equality, diversity and inclusion field, it can sometimes, understandably, because there's so much to do, be a focus on one particular group that risks excluding other groups, or certainly risks the giving due regard to the true intersectionality within that group. It was a really great introduction to talk about what does LGBT plus stand for. Those acronyms themselves are obviously a broad and diverse umbrella of terms that describes a very diverse community, and that is also a particular thing which I'll pick up in one of my personal experiences for me as well. I'm a gay man, but I'm a mixed race gay man. I'm a mixed race gay man who was adopted. I have discriminated or been discriminated against because of those characteristics, but also, I'm well educated, I earn a nice salary, I have characteristics that contribute to my privilege as much to any sort of negative experiences that I might have. So fundamental to this is understanding that rich mix of diversity within an individual and across communities that's really important. So personal experiences. So I mean, without doubt, one of the reasons that I chose to work in sexual health and HIV is because it's a speciality that it's easy to be an out gay man in. I definitely remember as a young junior doctor who was out at that time. I mean, I came out when I was at university, in the first year at university, but again, that was a safe space. I did it after I'd left home, when I felt comfortable with my new family, got the confidence of doing that, and then build up the confidence to go back home one weekend and tell my parents, which was all fine. And I mean, I've been very fortunate in my coming out experiences, although that's not to underestimate the amount of fear and anxiety I had around it. I chose to tell them late on a Sunday night when I knew I was getting the train back to university on the Monday morning, just in case it all went badly, which thankfully it didn't. But even being out as a junior doctor, you know, the impact of working or having jobs in sexual health and HIV before I chose that as a career, where there were lots of out gay men in leadership positions, clinical leadership, people who were my educational supervisors or my mentors, definitely made it, well, definitely contributed to it being one of the main reasons why I picked it as a speciality, because I could see people like myself in positions that I wanted to work in. And it gave me the confidence to do what I wanted to do and to kind of know that I could be my true self at work and not worry about that, and could then focus on the other aspects, you know, of my general life at the time, and also of the things that contributed towards my career progression. So that's the thing around about visible leadership and that environment that creates our own personal development or allows us to flourish. I mean, I was thinking hard about this. I think I've been really fortunate in terms of personal experiences of discrimination. I mean, I at work, I can't think of a time when I've been discriminated against based on my sexuality. That may well be a function of the area that I've worked in, and it's certainly not a reflection of what colleagues describe. But interestingly, going back to the intersectionality thing, I've definitely been experienced racism. You know, being in an area where unnecessary or unpleasant jokes were being made, or comments were being made, or being asked questions. The single thing that pops into mind all of my time when I think about this is the question, which I don't know, I almost hesitate from excusing people. Oh, it's a bit thoughtless, or a bit well-meaning. It's not. It's all racism. But getting asked a lot that "where do you come from" question, which I always answer Huddersfield, but know that they're asking me why are you brown. So yeah, but the times that, and this goes back to the environment thing, I can remember times when it's been said and I've not challenged it, and I've let it wash over, and I've underestimated the impact, the marginalizing impact, the fact that it makes you feel smaller, and the fact that if you're in a group, nobody else called it out. So you kind of think, even if they're not vocalizing it, they are feeling it themselves. And equally times when colleagues have called it out, and how massive that makes a difference, the impact on that of having somebody standing up for you, having somebody who's got your back, and feeling that other people who don't share your characteristics recognize that that's wrong and are confident enough to challenge it. So that, for me personally, is the example of how important the environment is that enables people to do that. And that, too frequently, I think, relies on individuals, and not frequently enough is supported by the organisation. You know, by which I mean, you know, leaders need to be more vocal and visible. Policies need to be more explicit about zero tolerance, and the constant reinforcing of that positive culture is what's needed to support those individuals to do better, you know, in the break room or in the lift or in the corridor on a night out when those comments are being made. Data collection and monitoring. This isn't just a tenuous way to drop something in that is part of my agenda all of the time, because I think that statement about if you don't count us, we don't count is really powerful and really meaningful. And this is timely, well, because yesterday was Census Day, but I really remember not just the first time I did the census, but also filling in other forms at the time. Well, in those days, there were no questions about sexual orientation or gender identity. So we have to celebrate the fact that those two questions now exist in the census. But whenever I first did the census, the ethnicity characteristics were very different from what they look like now. And there was never a box that met or described who I was, and I define myself as mixed white and black Caribbean, which there now is a box, as you all be aware. But the absence of that box used to infuriate me, and it wasn't just in the census, it used to happen all the time, so to the extent that I just stopped doing the survey, or I would write something really complicated in the free text, such that it was practically impossible to analyse. Perhaps not the most strident of protests, but it made me feel a little bit better. But that importance of being given a form to fill that includes your identity and characteristic is essential. So in this setting, that's about sexual orientation and gender identity monitoring, and that's so important. When we're talking about this kind of mind, body, spirit, individual thing, I mean, it's clearly important for the system. We can't understand health inequalities without good data. We can't measure the impact of the changes we make without good data. But it's so impactful on the individual. And if you, as an organisation, are employing a trans person or somebody who's non-binary, and their forms that they get to fill in, the ESR characteristics, or the staff survey that you send them to ask them about their experiences, only have 2 boxes for male and female, that individual is already, on purpose or not, already excluded. The message is that you're not welcome, and we don't see who you are, and you're not important to us. So the data collection thing is I think really important. And then just the final thing is about engagement and co-production. I think this has to be work that we all do together. Too often we rely on LGBT plus individuals or the LGBT community to carry the weight of the responsibility, and allies and organisations carrying most or some of that burden is an area that we need to do more work in. Personal experiences on this, I think, again, perhaps to sing the praises of sexual health and HIV as a speciality, but it is something that we do particularly well. We're definitely really good at the data thing. Our national data sets are about the only 2 data sets that have data on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we do have tick boxes when people register with our services that are inclusive, and we are able to produce either service level to improve experience, or national level data on that. And certainly my personal experiences of delivering services they're always the best when they're led by the people who they're delivered for. An example, I set up a trans and non-binary sexual health clinic at King's a couple of years ago in partnership with a trans-led organisation called Clinic Q. And it's branded. I mean, even though it's a partnership, we brand it all Clinic Q. It makes it look like the Clinic Q do everything. But that was important, and has really led to its success in terms of people coming and their experience, because it addresses the fundamental confidence and trust issues that individuals in this community have for the NHS and other sort of national organisations. So when we do things in partnership with the communities that we're serving, and I think for thinking about staff, that has to be with our LGBT networks, then the outcomes are much more impactful. So that's as much as I was going to say. I hope that's a good start for 10 for getting the discussions going. And I think I'm handing over to Vicky now to hear their story. So I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Vicky Pendleton. Thanks.
Hi everyone. I don't quite know how I'm supposed to follow that, to be honest. So I'm just going to talk about a bit about myself, really, and the journey I've been on from a youngster, really. I am going to attempt to share my screen, but we'll see how that goes. So I'm Vicky. I am a police officer in Staffordshire Police, currently a detective working in the CID department based at Hanley. So let me see if I can share my screen. I don't know if I can. No, it's not going to let me. So anyway, so a bit about me. I'm one of 2 children and had an amazing upbringing with fantastic parents. I did well at school. However, as I was coming towards the end of my school life, it did become more challenging, mainly around the fact that I was trying to figure out who on earth I was at that point. I started to struggle with my own identity, who I was, and then attempting to fit in with the norm, with, you know, what do 14, 15-year-olds, what are they supposed to look like? How do they fit in with a, you know, a group of people within a school system? I do recall a discussion with in a school classroom with a teacher that I'd got utmost respect for, and we got onto a discussion regarding LGBT plus, and her words were, "It's just not right." And at that point, I didn't quite know where to go, because for me, at that point, I was trying to figure out, do I fall into that category? Where am I? So that had a bit of an impact on me. I left school, you know, did really well in my GCSEs, etc., and then went on to college. And to say that was unsuccessful is probably an understatement. I met a great group of friends there, came out to them really early, and they did to me as well. Really good support from them, and you know, I'm still friends with quite a few of them now. You know, they are, you know, still my close friendship group. But the support I got at college was poor. I was struggling with the demands of college, the change in I've got to manage my own time, and eventually I dropped out. I didn't pass any of my A-levels. I didn't receive any help from any of the staff members there. And I just felt like I got nowhere really to turn. And it was shortly after this then that I then came out to my parents, which was daunting, as I'm sure you can imagine. However, they were incredibly supportive, but it did put a strain on our relationship. That was probably more around the fact that I was 16 and wanted to do what I wanted to do and not what my parents wanted me to do. At 17, I moved out and lived with a partner at the time, which, well, anybody moving out at 17, you can imagine what a disaster that was. I saw the light and I returned home, and then I spent a bit of time at home with my parents. I think at that point, how I talked about fitting in at school and trying to fit in with the norm of that, now I'd come out and I told people, I suddenly didn't know how I fitted in to the LGBT community. I didn't understand how I could be a part of that. And I was struggling with my identity a little bit. So I did the only thing I knew what to do was to make myself look as much like a lesbian as I possibly could. And yeah, I cut all my hair off. I was wearing masculine clothes, just because I didn't understand how else I was supposed to fit in you know, in that community. That was obviously my view as a 16-year-old, and that's very, very different now, as it would be for anybody. So as a young person, I always wanted to be a police officer, but just with the struggles I was going through trying to figure out who I was, I didn't feel coming up to the age of sort of 18, 19 that I could possibly join a career where I've then got to go and advise other people on how they should be behaving. And as such, I decided not to apply at that point. And I did manage to secure a job at a local school for children with special educational needs. And I was there for 10 years all in all, and absolutely loved it. I came out early to all the staff there. Again, I was quite confident in that, and everybody was really supportive. However, what I didn't do is come out to any of the pupils. Now, I look back on this now and I really, really wish I had. But instead, I'd actively lie. They would ask if I got a husband and I would say yes. and I would make up this little story of my life that fitted what they would expect. I look back on that and I think, why on earth did you do that? You know, there would have been young people that I would have had a big influence on that could probably really helped. Obviously that was something that worried me, and it wasn't really the worry of the children and how they would react. It was actually how parents would react. And I was concerned about the school, their reputation, how it would impact on them if, you know, parents decided they didn't want a lesbian teaching their children, you know. So that was a big concern for me. So another, I mean, Dr. Brady talked about, you know, sort of any kind of sort of abuse in the workplace and stuff, and I've never had that. But I am a big football fan. I've played in my time very badly, and I do like to go and watch the football. And I do recall an incident where I was at a home game for, you know, the mighty Port Vale, and I remember having to leave slightly early, and I walked past my own fans and I got abuse hurled at me at the top of their lungs, songs being sang to me and called names that I wouldn't want to repeat. And they came from my own fans. And that knocked me a little bit, because I thought we were sort of all on the same side. You know, the football sort of brings us all together with your team, but, you know, apparently not. So on to going into the police. It was 2015 when I sort of made the decision, it's time, you know, I'm getting on in age a little bit, I need to pull my finger out if it's something I want to do. So I went for it, and amazingly, I don't know how I did manage to get in. This again, it brought new anxieties at that point. Guess what? I've got to come out all over again. And I think that's the thing for us in this community, is you're constantly having to come out over and over again. Again, I was really, really lucky and got huge support from everybody. And I joined the LGBT network at that point. I didn't really take an active role in that up until the point a opportunity to go to a conference came up in Amsterdam, which was for police and criminal justice professionals. It was amazing, to say the least. I met some amazing friends that have stayed lifelong friends. I listened to stories of people from all over the world, you know, lots of conversations were happening, and listening to people from countries where being gay was still illegal, you know, and the challenges that they were facing in their, you know, forces. So I then moved on to the role of the co-chair within the network. Sort of after that conference, I just felt I've got to step up and start doing a little bit more. So it was 2017 that I stepped up into that role, and still continue doing that now. In 2016, I sort of took on a personal journey myself, and I was very, very lucky that in December 2017, via IVF, I had my little boy, Arthur, who is now 3 and a little whirlwind. I had him through the IVF process, and obviously that entailed me having to continue to work, but also go through this process, and that threw up challenges in itself, and things that we've sort of highlighted within Force now. I was working as a frontline officer at the time, and our station certainly wasn't equipped for somebody who wanted to go through the IVF process and had to inject themselves regularly. I was having to call up on the radio to say I needed to go back to the station. I was having to use a staff toilet to facilitate giving myself these injections. And this wasn't through the lack of trying, you know, that my bosses basically, but things weren't just fit, they weren't fit for purpose. So since that, things have started to be improved. We've started a new family network, which is very much in its infancy, but that is going to be addressing all those kind of things, not just for the LGBT community, but in general across the Force. And then crazy enough, I decided that I'd go through the IVF process again. And in 2019, I had my little girl, Betsy, who's now just gone 18 months. So that's me done. Absolutely done. So that's just a little bit about me and my, I suppose, personal journeys, very much condensed. I spoke a little bit about how I came to feel I needed to be accepted and how I fitted into this group as an LGBT person. And I don't want to put too much of a negative spin at the end of this. However, quite recently, I'm part of quite a large group on Facebook for lesbian, bi, trans women. And of late, due to the things that have been happening in London, I'm suddenly not welcome there either. And that's not because I'm LGBT plus myself. I'm not because I'm in that community, but because I'm a police officer. There's a lot of hate, there's a lot of abuse going on, and it's quite upsetting to watch, because somewhere where you should feel safe, you can't speak out again. So I guess just from that, I think it's just important to remember that everybody deserves to be, you know, who they are, regardless of where they sit in the world or in the community. And that's it from me, really. I did have some photos, but I couldn't get them working, so I apologise. So I think we're going back to Paul. Thank you.
Vicky, Michael, thank you very much for two very personal experiences of living the life as a gay man or a lesbian woman, and the challenges that comes out. And Vicky, I was absolutely desperate for that presentation to work, because we know, following our call earlier in the week, there was going to be lots of pictures of Vicky, and we were very much looking forward to the 17-year-old Vicky, because I think we can all relate with the stories of trying to fit in, trying to belong to an internal community in the LGBT plus, but also then in our work and social life. And I wrote some things down just before I bring Jenny in. You know, the coming out phase for anybody is, at least leading up to it, is one of the most scariest things ever about acceptance of the people you know and love. And fortunately, my experience was like Michael and Vicky's, has been very positive, but also recognising absolutely that that's not everybody's journey at all. We've been very lucky, and that led us on to chosen family. You know, who we choose to be ourselves with. I think Michael used the phrase, "We don't see who you are," and actually, that's really important. That in all of our organisations, there are people that we don't see the whole self, all of themselves, when they come to work, because they're scared to do that. Positive role models. Vicky talked about dressing in a particular way, but actually, when we were younger, there weren't many positive role models. I guess it would be interesting. I'm not quite sure the age range of the group of people on the call, but for definitely us 40 plussers, there weren't many role models that you could look up to in a positive way. And not forgetting that really important part that Vicky just talked about, which linked back to Michael, a mix richness of diversity, a community within a community within a community, and the diversive nature that can have when you start to feel that you belong. I'm going to ask Jenny. I'm not sure if Jenny's joining me. I'm looking at myself at the minute, so I'm not sure whether Jenny's joining us. There's Jenny.
There we are.
So we're seeing each other now, Jenny. But I guess, Jenny, some real personal stories there from Vicky and Michael. What are your immediate thoughts? What's going through your head?
Really interesting to hear both their stories, and I've always felt that individual stories, are more powerful than slideshows. I really do, and we've learned that of inclusion, listening to stories, and I relate to so much of what they said. But on the other hand, as a transgender woman, my experience is different. You just talked, Paul, about in your 40s. I'm beyond that. I'm in my 50s, and I'm listening to those the coming out stories. If you grew up from my age, it was impossible to be trans as a young person in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there was still the law that forbid it, talking about sexuality in schools. We still had Section 28. And there was no representation or people to look up for. All I saw as a young trans person were images of trans people that were being mocked on the television. You know, it was a figure of fun. And there was no language. So trans people always ask, when did you realise? It's all very difficult. In my head, from the age of 9 or 10, I knew I was a girl, but it was impossible for me to talk to anybody about that. It was impossible for me to find a community. There was no community. So it's quite typical of my generation that I came out or transitioned, as trans people will talk about, in my mid-30s. It's very interesting that my generation, that's not uncommon, got to a position in life where that was possible. Other than that, I found it was never going to be possible for me. I thought I lived for the first 30 years just thinking I was never going to be able to be my authentic true self. And I was privileged in a sense that I had that opportunity. So it is interesting to hear those coming out stories and that progression of trying to fit in and find a community. I had no community. I eventually found a community on internet chat rooms in the late 90s, because we're so disparate as trans people. I actually found people that I could see that actually were like me. And I actually saw people that I could I? You know, and that's where I found my community, and that's where my journey started. But sadly, it was much later. It was not until my 30s that anybody knew. And there's people in this room now who knew me before I transitioned, because I transitioned in 2006. And now not one of them would have had any idea that I was trans.
And I think that's the whole point about, we don't see who you are, isn't it, really, Jenny? Generally, you know, we can hide behind our innermost demons if that's what we choose to do. We can hide behind what we want our work colleagues to see and what we don't. And the importance of this inclusion school and the importance of sharing our journeys and sharing our stories is to show people that there is a journey and there is a path that people go through. And I guess, Jenny, just to say, I'm 48, so I think I was being a little bit kind to myself by saying 40 plus rather than accepting my 50s. But when I came out in the 90s, the HIV/AIDS stigma was around, and that created a whole different sense of being scared of where to go. I think if we now start to bring Michael and Vicky into our chat, it would be really helpful just to start a discussion on. I think Michael talked about outcomes and creating a positive LGBT plus environment. I guess it would be helpful just to hear about, you know, how do we create a positive LGBT plus environment for us all, and what would it look like in a good workplace? Michael, shall I, as you, I wrote that down when you spoke. That might be a little bit unfair, but I'm going to keep going to give you a few minutes to get your thoughts on a work environment, a positive work environment. What would it look like?
I think I started to touch on some of my thoughts, I think, in the talk, and I think the other thing that I was just thinking as you were talking there, Paul, I just wanted to add on that, you know, whilst data collection and monitoring and measurable outcomes are really important, they can't be at the expense of or a replacement for real culture change and things that actually you can't always put on a spreadsheet or measure. So I think that's the other important thing to keep in mind. I mean, I think what does it look like? I think I always use I think we've touched on it already, the phrase individuals being able to recognize themselves, whether that's as a staff member in the organization that they work for or a service user or patient in the coming to the clinic. So I think we have to be really explicit and almost overly explicit. I mean, there's so much catching up to do, I think, in this area, that we almost have to go even further in demonstrating, you know, our commitment to inclusion. You know, so I think and so it feels meaningful and not just, oh, it's Pride Month, we better do something, or the network's really pestering us because it's LGBT History Month, let's do something. So it has to, you know, cut through everything that we do. So the data stuff is you know, when somebody comes to be employed in your organisation, that's the first sign that you kind of see what kind of organisation you are. So the language in the information that we give out, the language and the imagery that we have on our websites has to be inclusive of gender diversity and has to include images of people from all of our communities. Those are very sort of relatively simple kind of external ways that we can start to put the message out. I mean, I think, you know, we've all got equality, diversity and inclusion policies, but do they go far enough in explicitly and robustly talking about zero tolerance? You know, do we not just in the policies but in the way that we live our working lives day to day really follow up on what our intentions are? I mean, I'm a great believer in supporting networks. I think that's a very simple way for an organisation, both to create a safe space and a sense of community for individuals from the LGBT plus community, and to demonstrate their commitments, you know, so that it's funded, so that you know, those individuals who often will give up their time, their own time to do that work, you know, have some time back to do it properly. So everybody, not just those of us who are consultants or senior managers who find it easier to fit into our more flexible days, but every member of the workforce can give up their time or engage with the network as much as possible. So I think networks are really important. And then again, but then also seeing that as a fundamental part of the organisation. So it's not just, well, we sorted out the LGBT stuff now because we've given the LGBT network a couple of grand, but really integrating them, consulting with them, involving them in all of the decisions. I mean, the organisation I work, I would say at King's, I mean, the hospital is catching up. I would say it's not a leader. I mean, it does some good things. We have a good network, but it could do a lot more. But we've recently just appointed an EDI lead at executive level, very late, but better late than never. And there's starting to be a process of meaningful engagement in policies and activity of work through the network and out to the wider organisational culture. So.
Brilliant. Kay, who's on the call, who's the chair of the LGBT plus network at UHM, will gladly hear you use the word time to be able to do stuff, which is an active conversation that we're having. Mike, I will come back to you. I will come back to you about pronouns. You talked about the importance of language. So I will come back to you about what pronouns and the importance, but I guess Jenny and Vicky, start with you first of all, the importance of networks. So we had a really good chat when we met on Friday about your network. What does the network force do in the network do within the police force to, you know, promote this inclusion?
Yeah, I suppose we're primarily there for our members. So when somebody comes into the police force, or they may have already been in before, they can join our network as either a member or an anonymous member if they want to. This way we sort of link in with them with any work that's coming out, any events that are happening, but also around policies and procedures. Obviously policy changes all the time, and we're constantly reviewing policy. That all those policies now always come through the staff networks, and not just the LGBT plus, but all the staff networks. We have an oversight of that, just to add guidance, I guess. But I think primarily, as I said before, we're there for the members, to support members, and not just the members of the network, but members of the force as well. As you were saying earlier, you know, ask the questions, because you might not know the answers, and it's okay to ask. Well, as you can imagine, as police officers, we will sometimes go to, you know, an incident that an officer might just not be sure, and that's what the network's there for. You know, give us a ring, drop us an email, you know, and we can help support in how to deal with something. You know, that's kind of what we're there for.
And thanks, Vicky. And Jenny, I guess from a NHS system point of view. And I've taken my chat down because I was reading the chats at the same time as listening, but I think you've just won an award for some of the work that you've done with inclusion. But what's it like in the system? You know, what does the NHS look like from a staff network point of view?
I think it's interesting. Thanks for that, Paul. It's interesting. I think we've been behind the police force and the fire in developing staff networks and actually on inclusion. I think for many years, I think we were complacent in the NHS. With the NHS, we're lovely. Everybody's lovely in the NHS, right? We're all welcome and inclusive. And I think on all areas of inclusion, we didn't get on top of this. And maybe areas like the police, forces, they were forced to actually face up to that maybe sooner. I don't know. I might be wrong with that, but my instinct isn't. And we're trying to get our networks developed, and it's you've got to persevere and it's hard work. I think they are vital. I wish there was a network when I transitioned. I wish there'd be somebody I could have spoken to in the NHS when I felt, completely alone. So a network would have been brilliant of just somebody of a group that I could have gone to that maybe would have understood where I was and what I was going through. So I think developing networks is really important. They must be led by the people involved. So I think there's lots of, I'm sure in this session today, there may well be that I would guess the majority of people here are not LGBT, right? And all want to be allies and supportive. But I've been in LGBT meetings when the LGBT people have been a minority in that room, and that can happen. And far from beef, we're not wanting allies and people supporting us to be there, but we do need space where we can talk about our experience and what we have in common, I think, and that support. So I think networks are important. I think we're a little bit behind. I think there's a massive will, certainly in this system. I've been so impressed by how this system's trying to tackle all matters of inclusion and LGBT inclusion, and I'm delivering some trans awareness training, and the support I've had from the system in doing that shows to me that the system wants to get this right, and actually has to, for the patients it serves, not just its staff, who we're talking about just now, but for the people we serve. Because if we're not inclusive and supportive of our staff, we'll never be properly supportive and inclusive of the people we care for. So I do think we're on the right path, but we have got some way to go for me. And particularly around trans inclusion at the moment in the UK, which it's a pretty tough place, I believe. I genuinely think it was and it sounds terrible, in some ways easier for me to transition in 2006 than it may be now in the white heat of a culture war against trans people that you're seeing in the UK. And all our trans staff will be aware of this.
And that's very much part of the conversation we had on Friday, wasn't it, about this almost societal curve of things changing and needing to change, but to change, there's got to be that hard assault almost on changing the mind of the society as a whole. I think that will neatly bring me back to Michael and we've talked about role models, we've talked about language, we've talked about feeling comfortable. Just tell us a bit more about pronouns and why they are so important when we're talking about visibility.
Yeah, I mean, pronouns are so important because they are so meaningful and important to trans and non-binary people about being described or communicated with in the way that is correct or the way that they want. And I think again, it's a way to explicitly demonstrate that we mean what we're saying, and it's a way to explicitly and simply communicate that this is an inclusive organization, or this is an inclusive service, or we see you. So by introducing yourself and using your pronouns at meetings, by having pronouns in your Twitter bio or in your email signature, or I can see you're wearing a "Hello, my name is" badge, Paul. You can now have your pronouns put on your hello, my name is badge as well. So all of the major suppliers, or certainly 3 of the big major suppliers, will put your pronouns on there for you. So, and it's one of those things. It's a bit, well, let's say a bit like in a similar way to rainbow lanyards and rainbow badges. It's something that will not mean anything to the vast majority, or be not noticed, or gone, oh yeah, and then moved on from. But for the individual or the community that we're trying to respect and engage with and reflect how they want to be communicated with, it makes a massive difference. I mean, people will know this is when if you started wearing rainbow lanyards or rainbow badges, or using pronouns in any setting, people notice it, they comment about it, and they come up and thank you about it. So you know, and I think it's a similar thing in a way. It's kind of, you know, it's about the same as misgendering, or you know, and using the wrong name. You know, it's just disrespectful, and to not do it is the opposite of being inclusive. And it for me also, it's a way to address that. You know, many, if not all, but many trans and non-binary people, who, however well-meaning you are as a service, will come expecting not great service, to be fair. This goes back to that confidence trust thing, because they've already been poorly treated, or their friends have been poorly treated, you know, and we see from the data there's a reasonable expectation that they are going to be poorly treated. So being able to kind of like slightly break down some of those barriers with how we initially introduce ourselves, or the information that we provide, can start to build up that confidence and trust, and build that therapeutic relationship.
Jenny's nodding away there.
Can I
So
just,
Jenny,
yeah, just on that, when I see somebody's pronouns and emails signature, every time I see that, it fills me with a bit of joy. It feels like it might be one more person that might be an ally, because misgendering hurts. Misgendering absolutely hurts, and it happens to me. I'm 12 years since I transitioned. It happens to me on no occasions deliberately, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt any the less. It's happened to me in front of a room full of people where somebody's referred to me in the wrong gender, and it immediately puts you outside everybody else there. It immediately makes you an outsider. Immediately says to my brain, who do you think you're kidding? You'll never fit in. And it is going to only be broken down by normalizing the use of pronouns, to understand that they and them are pronouns that have always been used. That getting your pronouns right, and they're not my preferred pronouns, they are my pronouns. So, you know, it will happen, I'll get misgendered, but the more we normalize the use of that, the more we understand that actually everybody should be able to say what their pronouns are. In my view, the less likely that will be to happen. And it is a barrier. I've heard stories of people who have been deliberately misgendered, or the doctors refused to gender them, to use their correct pronouns, and they've not gone to the doctor and they've got ill. Or a staff member whose trans daughter was misgendered, accessing a mental health service, and the daughter didn't want to go back and access that service again. And that's the real outcomes of just those little tiny words that, for trans people, are more powerful than almost anything.
and that takes us right back to body, mind, and spirit, doesn't it? Really, in terms of the core value set, how you feel. I'm gonna. A question's caught my eye in the chat box. So, like every good host, I'm gonna throw something in left field. So Mandy, who works in a residential home, and this is really interesting, I guess, because I am nearly 50, I'll admit it now, Jenny, rather than nearer 40. But how do you, aging population, there are more people now who are absolutely identifying as part of the LGBT plus community. How do you promote inclusion amongst residents and staff at a care home? I'm going to give you all just 10-20 seconds to think about that one, and I'll witter on to fill the space. But it is really important now, isn't it, that the more of our people become visible in society. What happens when you're 70 and you go into a nursing home or a care home, and you are the only gay person, lesbian, trans, bisexual, whatever that is? Do people regress back into being, hidden in the closet, whatever phrase you want to use, particularly as we get an aging society? Vicky, What are your thoughts?
That's a big one.
Thanks for that. I think I would suggest is it wouldn't be something that you'd go steaming ahead into, you know, get the rainbow flags out and let's get them flying. I think it's probably something that needs to go at a steady pace, introduced slowly, and it's about conversations, starting those conversations with people, and making it so people have got a safe space to talk, and know that when they do talk to somebody, you know, within that environment, that's going to be okay, and they're not going to be judged for what they talk about. So yeah, I think it's just about starting conversations, really.
Jenny.
Well, as I hurtle towards that age, I think it's really, I guess it's interesting. It may be that in care home settings now, many of the people there and the LGBT people grew up when it was illegal to be gay, you know, and that's their experience. And maybe, hopefully in the future, that as we all get more inclusive society, hopefully care homes will become that. But it scares me. It scares me. We don't talk enough about being an older LGBT plus person, I don't think. It scares me, the thought I might be in a care home. How will I hold on to my identity if I start to suffer from dementia? Will I lose the genuinely part of me? Will I lose if I start to remember how I was before I was 30? That's not me how I am now. So that I do have a genuine fear of that. If I end up in a care home, how will I keep my identity? One thing we can do is start to educate in care homes in terms of the staff, because if we don't educate the staff in terms of how they can make the place more friendly for LGBT people, that's going to be difficult. And you know, we haven't always, as a system, focused on, I don't think, educating in that sector. And maybe that's something we could start to do, because very few of those I think I've seen Age UK have some interesting information out, for instance, about trans people and LGBT people. So I think bigger organisations do, but I'd expect a lot of the smaller nursing home employers don't have policies, don't have the facilities. So maybe it's something as a system we could start to think, what can we do to influence that that part of health and social care?
Michael, I guess all your facts and figures will be telling you we're all hurtling towards this care home quicker than we care to think, you know, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm hurtling just as fast as everybody else. I mean, I think it's right to highlight the issue specifically of older LGBT plus people who have both the general discrimination, inequalities issues, plus the extra ones of age that Jenny's touched on, reminding us that, you know, these are people who've lived through times when their sexuality was criminalised, when as Jenny's really described, they grew up in times when there wasn't community or wasn't support. It was very different. And often getting older is a time, you know, they've lived through the AIDS epidemic, they perhaps don't have the extended family that heterosexual cisgender people might have as much, so the support is very different, or often absence. So there's a particular issue for older LGBT people that we need to be mindful of, and I think there's not enough focus on that. I'm really pleased and proud that the elderly care team at King's College Hospital is doing some specific work around LGBT plus older people in hospital settings, starting off with a survey back to data, but also with some staff training. And I think that is the starting point. It has to start from staff training and making it an organisational priority. Jenny mentioned some Age UK stuff at the other organisation I would commend to you if you're thinking about this or working in this area is Opening Doors London. They have a project called Pride in Care, which is kind of a quality assurance project that involves training but also works in the care home setting, and they're also working with the CQC to try and feed or weave some of that into into their inspection. So I think there are some sort of structural system level things that we should be starting out. I mean, you might also have heard in the news recently, perhaps one of the answers is LGBT plus care homes or residential homes. I think the first one, I'm pleased to say, has been Tonic Housing have bought up a little patch in South London in Lambeth, so I'm signing up for that.
Yeah,
but I think I mean, this also just, I'll stop talking a second, but that also brings back that issue of, I think, you know, whether we need or should have very specialist, and not just in the care sector, but very specialist things like LGBT plus care and residential homes, or whether we should be making it generic, or certainly not letting those specialist services, let the generic services off the hook. You know, you know, we should drag up the inclusivity of the generic services whilst having as many residential homes for LGBT communities only.
Thank you. And Carl has very kindly put his hand up, so I was going to remind people to say, if you do, there's a lot, the chat's going too quick for me now, so I can't see questions, but clearly the team will let us know. But Carl, you've got a question. If anybody else has got any questions, do please put your hand up. But Carl, thanks for putting your hand up.
Thank you. It's not so much a question as an observation. And I just wanted to mention a group within the LGBT community, which Michael will have come across in his work. And obviously it's men who have sex with men, but who are already in relationships with women, and also women as well who are in traditional heterosexual marriages. And I think we tend to overlook them within our community, and they tend to be rather hidden, but they, you know, they also need support as well. It also worries me as well that within the LGBT community, there's a lot of focus on men, and I tend to think that women tend to be very hidden as well. And I don't know why we have that bias, but you know, that's just an observation that I wanted to throw in. So there are a couple of hidden groups out there, and groups that we assume will be comprised, but I think we tend to overlook them somewhat. Thank you.
And Carl, it's a good point as well, because then the health outcomes and hiding, you know, the obviously sexual health issues, let alone anything else, you know, can become a problem if you go to the doctor with your wife, etc. So thanks for raising it. I did see another hand go up, but I don't know where to look to see where the hands are.
Shadid got a question, actually. Shadid, do you want to mute and come in?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I can't do chats or raise hands, so my technical abilities are clearly zero today, I think. I just wondered really, you know, we've talked about an inclusive society, and I very much value the panel's thoughts on, you know, those people whose, you know, religion, so I'm a Muslim in terms of my faith, etc., and whose religion plays a huge part in their inability to come out, and your thoughts around that in terms of the support, etc., they can get. Because, you know, the world is a tough place. We've all articulated that, and it is much better than it was in the 90s, and we know that. But I just would very much value, you know, your thoughts and thinking around those people whose, you know, faith is a huge deterrent in them confidently coming out. I just very much welcome what you think around that.
I'll go to Michael first.
It's a really important point, and goes back to that that issue about we need to be thinking about intersectionality all the time, you know, and otherwise we don't see the particular challenges of the individual. I mean, I think also the thing is again my other point, which is about being led by the experts. So, you know, I don't have any. I mean, I'm a lapsed Catholic, but you know, so lapsed that doesn't impact on my personal experience about things. But you're absolutely right, that can be a real challenge and a struggle from those from faith communities. So I think the answer has to be, first of all, for those of us who don't understand that, to recognise we don't understand it, and secondly, to speak to those who do, to go to those faith communities. And I think it's also that other point I was making about the power of partnership with voluntary organisations or activists or individuals, and there's certainly plenty of those from all faith communities, I would say, and who need sometimes a leg up in terms of funding or time, or us, the big NHS or the big any organisation, to bringing them in, valuing them, and acting on what they advise.
Thank you.
Jenny, I guess all the inclusion training that you've done over the years, this might have formed a big part. And then I'm going to bring James in, who's had his hands up patiently for a while.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm privileged in some respects that I hadn't a problem when I transitioned with my faith, if I had a faith, and that can be really difficult. And there are groups, I think for every religion there will be an LGBT group, but that doesn't make it any easier if your community is not accepting. And you know, we've seen that in some communities where I think we had and it was across a community. It wasn't across one faith, but protesting outside schools on education. You know, how's that going to feel for LGBT people in those areas? Somebody's put in the chat box about the Naz and Matt Foundation. So we had an event a year and a half ago where we had this amazing presentation, and I think you can probably find the links online, who spoke about this very issue about somebody who took their life because of I think that battle between faith and identity in terms of LGBT. So it's difficult. I've had to learn actually not to judge people who are of faith that they might be against me. So, you know, I heard stories in the past about, I remember one Pope made some comments that that transgender people were a bigger threat than global warming, I think was something like a comment. So I start to assume that everybody of that faith would be against me. And I've had to learn that that is not the case. That is not the case. So we make those assumptions, but there are no easy answers to that other than educating and getting society to educate.
And just before I bring James in, I guess you talk about the issues we had last year with schools being picketed because of same-sex partners, you know, raising children. And one of the most poignant things for me at that time was my niece and nephew, who are seven years age. They did a picture of themselves with their Uncle Paul and Uncle Aaron, and they were very, very simple message. Well, Uncle Paul loves Uncle Aaron, doesn't he, Mummy? You know, it is just a very, very simple message about love at the end of the day. James Patrick, you had a question.
Wasn't so much a question, and thank you for allowing me to speak and giving everyone's stories. In regard to the LGBT accommodation nursing home facility, they've also thinking about doing this in Manchester, where they have this idea that it would be 50% LGBT and then 50 non-LGBT. So with that, we're not creating more of a segregated society, and all care homes have to be viable financially, especially in the current climate with social care being massively underfunded. So with that, it's going to be a tick box exercise. Oh, well, I'm sorry, we've got 50% LGBT, so we can't offer the other 50%. Or with a place which is only that, again, in some ways, I feel it's some kind of like in America, where they had blacks on one bus, whites on another bus, or segregation more than inclusion. So as someone who worked in the care industry for quite a few years, I think it'd be more problematic. Yes, be more supportive and understanding, provide relevant training, make sure everything's inclusive. Great, but just to have us separated, I would see it more of a step back than way forward.
Yeah, James, I guess it's about the individual care home, isn't it? And it's about how people feel in that care home, you know, whether you're LGBT plus or whether there's a race mixed match or a gender mixed match. You know, it's all about the inclusion. All of those things are about making sure everybody has a positive experience of their care home, rather than it being one or the other. You know, they should be available for both, really, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, because otherwise we're going to have ghettos, say in Manchester, Birmingham, Brighton, in London, where there are large LGBT populace. But if we look in Staffordshire, which has a fair population, but is not as large as, say, Manchester or Birmingham, people will then feel, I'll have to uproot and move to a larger city, which I don't know anyone. The limited support network I may have is somewhere I am, so I'm going to have to move away from them to be properly looked after, which is not what we're wanting as a health and social care system.
No, absolutely. Are there any more, Leslie or Jen, are there any more hands up? I can't see any more.
Can't see any hands at the moment. Can you see any, Leslie?
No hands at the moment. I've just popped a little encouragement in the chat for people to raise their hands if they've got a question.
So,
Lots of support in the comments that people have been posting.
One last question just for the panel before we disappear, or you disappear into groups, I should say, rather than we disappear. We talked right at the very beginning about outcomes for members of the LGBT plus community and accessing health services and all of those things. I guess there are quite a few health and social care people on the call. So Vicky, I'm sorry, this may not, I will come to you and ask you the question, and colleagues in the fire service I've seen as well. But what should healthcare providers be doing to make sure that members of our community feel safe, feel it's a safe space, feel they can be themselves at health appointments or in hospital? What will be the takeaway message for people who are running services to say this is the thing you need to be mindful of? And I'll go Jenny, Michael and Vicky in terms of the answers. All the healthcare providers on the call, what's the thing that Jenny, Michael, Vicky, you want them to take away with in terms of making their services be supportive enough for people to be their whole selves? Jenny.
Okay, well, speaking for trans people, if you want to not have barriers, I mean, there's in training, there's a whole list of things, but I'm not going to go through those. The most important thing, I think, is education of our staff, because there has been no education previously for clinicians in health and social care on trans and gender identity. And what we need is for the staff not to be the barriers themselves, for the staff, because they struggle, because they are not sure, they've not supported and have not awareness of trans and non-binary, they become the barrier. There's lots of things we can do better about, visible signs, getting our policies right, other things like that. But what actually I think is important is that first contact, when they speak to a healthcare professional, that they're not given an experience where they're misgendered, or the people just has no understanding of what it's like to be trans or non-binary. So the simple answer is always seems to be training, but that has to be, for me, the thing that will make the most progress if we all have some understanding.
Brilliant, thanks Jenny. Michael.
I'm glad that Jenny's picked training, because it means that I don't have to do that one, because there's more than one really big one. So I'm going to go with data collection and monitoring. So look across your organisation, and if your IT system, if your patient electronic record, if your HR ESR does not allow you to collect information on on sexual orientation, gender identity and trans status, then you are not a truly inclusive organisation, because, as I've said before, that it communicates to individuals that they're included and they're welcome, and it gives us the tools to actually better understand the inequalities and measure what we do to address them. The only other thing that I would say, because I was banging my drum about data collection, is that, again, the caveat is that it's not the be-all and end-all answer to really understanding experience, and we need to be more creative, particularly when we're thinking about intersectionality. The reason I say that is, naturally, our communities are small, so they often get lost in small surveys, particularly if you're trying to then analyse it by ethnicity or disability or by age. So we need to come up with more creative ways to engage with our staff and patient users that ensures that all voices are heard beyond just the survey, but the survey is the starting point.
And Vicky, I mean, I guess you picked up on this a little bit about your workplace when you're having IVF, but what would your thoughts be?
It's funny, because that's what I was going to touch on, actually, and I would say don't assume, because the amount of appointments I've had to go to through that process, and just in general, it's always assumed that because I've got 2 children, well, I must be straight and I must be married to a man. That's not the case. I'm a single lesbian mum, and I shouldn't have to explain that every time I go for an appointment. So I can't really advise or give any suggestions on the healthcare world, because that's not my world. But from a personal point of view, yeah, just don't assume.
Brilliant. I think that's a message for all of us, Vicky, to end on. Don't assume, and thank you everybody for. I'm clearly going to have to go back and read through the chat because it was going too quick. I hope we've managed to answer as many questions as we possibly could go through, but thank you for putting your hands up. Thank you for the chat, and we're now going back to Jane for the next part of our session. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody participating in this afternoon's session. The richness of the conversation, the engagement in the chat, the listening to the stories, and of course we all joined a room that meant something to us, I guess, over the course of the last 15 minutes. So I hope you've been able to take away from our inclusion school something that you'll be able to take back to your workplace. I think the overriding message for me, for all of us, is to be open, to be transparent, and to make sure that all of our services are, when we look at them holistically, we take a step back, that they represent how we actually feel by the look and by the language of them. I certainly hope you've enjoyed the last 2 hours. It's been a pleasure to host both Michael, Vicky and Jenny as part of the conversation. And this, I think, Shajida, this is going to be a podcast that's going to go out to people. And for me, the importance of this is about people listening to it and taking messages away that refer directly to them, to help them change the way in which they perhaps perceive LGBT plus issues. My train is getting me straight onto the next Teams meeting, as it only seems that that's where the only place trains go these days is from one Teams meeting to the next. So I will have to leave you in Shajida's hands, but thank you very much for everybody. It's been a pleasure to host. I certainly hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed hosting it. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And I think I speak for everyone when I say huge thank you for hosting the conversation today. And I think we've all found it really insightful and thought-provoking. And it's been great having you here. And you're now on my list of people to host future events. Just so you know, I always keep a list. But there you go. So thank you very much. Okay. Right. So Jane, do we have a slide?
We do indeed.
Just so that everyone can... otherwise, I'll be left to ramble on, which I'm very happy to do. No issues with that whatsoever. Just in terms of some of our next steps.
Yeah. Okay. Just going a bit crazy on me, as it does from side to side. Let's see if we can. Okay.
Oh no.
We
Further
are.
down.
We
Further
are
down.
there. Here we go.
Right. Thank you, Jane. As I said in my introduction, this is the third of our winter inclusion schools, and of course we're now in spring, moving on to summer. And what we've been doing, following on from each of these inclusion school sessions that we've held, is we've looked at the feedback from the chat, we've looked at the evaluation, and the plan is that we are going to look at holding some, very bespoke and targeted masterclasses, which are going to take place in spring, summer 21. So these will be around racial inclusion, they'll be around women in leadership, and of course around LGBT+, with that having been our final winter inclusion school series. So please do keep an eye out. We will be doing some comms, some flyers in terms of the masterclasses. What we're going to do is group some of the core themes that people would like to know more about and learn more about, and provide some further in-depth learning. And I can tell you, one of the things that came out of the Race Inclusion series was around white privilege. Women in leadership, one of the core themes that came out of there was around imposter syndrome. So we are going to look at some more in-depth masterclasses. We will then look at a further suite of autumn inclusion school sessions. So, you know, for us, this is about keeping the conversation moving, but it's about moving beyond the conversation in terms of what are those actions that we want to take moving forward. And this is around the wider inclusion piece. It's not just with one protected characteristic, it's about what else we can do in terms of enhancing that wider inclusion agenda across our system. As a system, we are also about to embark on a cultural education programme for our senior leadership, and we're starting off with racial inclusion, and we're going to look at starting that off in May. And that's going to be a very sort of programme which is experiential in terms of having some of those uncomfortable conversations when it comes to discrimination. So we look forward to updating you more about that in terms of our future inclusion school sessions. Now, from all of this, the learning never stops, the conversations never stop for us. You will receive some follow-up learning resources. You know, I do encourage you all, please, to review this and look at that, because, you know, whilst we are doing these sessions, there is something about taking that time out for ourselves and to do some of our own learning around the wider inclusion agenda. So from me, what I would like to say is, you know, please, everybody, let's keep the conversation live. You know, I myself do Twitter quite a lot in terms of really shining a light on some of these, you know, really, really important conversations. So on that note, what I'm going to say is thank you so much for your contribution, for your input, for everything that you've shared with us today, especially to our guests that have joined us today. I know Paul has left, Dr. Michael Brady and Vicky Pendleton and Jenny Harvey for sharing their stories and sharing their thoughts. It's been an absolute delight having you with us today. And I'm going to leave you all on this final slide. It isn't about the size of the action, it's about how many people really do take part. So small actions with lots of people can affect big change. And really today is about that. It is about making those big changes for a better and a more inclusive, wider society. So thank you very much, everyone. And let's all give ourselves a round of applause. Come on.
Yes. Unmute.
And let's have a round of applause. Thank you, everyone.